The young elven mage stood dumbfounded at the front desk of the Adventuring Guild, as the tired-looking desk clerks sighed to themselves before repeating what they had just said. First-time adventurers are required to be assigned an experienced adventurer as per Regulation 38, Section 2b. Althea Meliamne, of the High Elven House of Meliamne, sputtered for a moment, as she tried and failed to maintain her composure in front of the wizened halfling clerk. Looking down at the piece of paper that she was handed, Althea once again focused on the point of contention, as the picture of a human clad in a suit of chainmail with metal plates, and covering some of the more vital areas. In the human's right hand was a fairly well-crafted halberd, and on his head was the full-plate helmet, which obscured their face. As the mage opened her mouth to object, the elderly clerk simply raised their hand in a stopping motion. The rules are the rules. If you want to become an adventurer, you will need to go for your first quest with your assigned assisting observer. Sighing in defeat, Althea nodded her head in acknowledgement, before looking back down at the paper which stated that they would be arriving within the hour, and that she should sit in the waiting room. Following the instructions, it only took a few more minutes before a human matching the picture, plus a large travel-sized field pack, walked into the guild hall. The armoured human conversed with the clerk for a moment, who pointed over to Althea while saying her name. The human turned back to the clerk, and continued speaking for a second before nodding their head and walking over to her. Taking his helmet off, Althea could see that the human man was in his mid to late 20s, with dark black hair and brownish eyes. Alright, rookie, let's go. I already picked out a decent first quest to do. Althea flared in indignation at the nickname of Rookie. She had spent the better part of a century studying the magical arts. Who was this human, only a decade into his adulthood, to call her a rookie? If anything, I am your senior, human. You are still in your third decade, while I am well into my second century. I am no rookie, thank you very much. The human rolled his eyes in annoyance, which only served to fan the flames of Althea's anger before responding. This is your first quest, while I have been here for more than half a decade. In this case, I hold seniority. However, we can argue on the way there. For now, grab your stuff and let's get moving. Deciding that the argument would end there, Althea grabbed her staff and magically imbued satchel, holding all of her personal effects, before following after the human. As the human made his way out of the city with Althea in tow, she could not help but notice that many of the passers-by seemed to greet the human warmly, which struck Althea as mildly interesting. Half a decade was not too much time, but it would seem that the human had ingratiated himself with many of the people within the city. As the pair reached the city gates, one of the gate guards greeted the human with a wave as they approached. Hey there, Henry. Going out again? And with a partner this time. Isn't that a sight? The Dragonborn guard let out a hearty laugh as they patted the human, Henry, apparently, on the back. Yeah, I got assigned babysitting duty and now I have a +1. Are we free to move through? While Althea glared a hole through the back of Henry's head, the Dragonborn nodded his head and called out to one of his compatriots, who opened up the gates and let the pair through. Before Althea was able to follow after Henry, the Dragonborn guard quickly pulled her aside to have a quick private conversation. Listen, I know it might be a bit grating to be partnered up with Henry, but bear with it. He might be a bit rough around the edges, but he's a good man, and if you are ever in a bad situation, don't hesitate to ask for help. Althea scoffed at the Dragonborn's words. After all, it would be the human who shall crawl back to her when things get hairy, not the other way around. Jogging back over to the human in question, Althea realized that they did not actually know what kind of quest the pair were going after. And, unfortunately for her, the only person she could ask was the object of her contempt. Sighing internally, the elf tapped on Henry's shoulder. What kind of quest did you get me? Maybe in order to take out a bandit camp? Perhaps a dungeon crawl? The human let out a quiet chuckle that caused Althea's anger to flare up, before Henry pulled out the quest paper and handed it over to the elven mage. Looking over it for a second, Althea found that the two of them had been assigned a fairly low-stakes monster hunt in one of the local forests a few hours' cart trip away from the city. Picked a simple mission for your first assignment. Figured it would be a good enough quest to break you into the adventuring world. Now come on, let's get moving. If we're quick about it, we'll arrive at the forest by sunfall and be prepared to complete the quest in the morning. This left Althea slightly confused. The forest detailed by the quest paper was only a couple hours on cart. Why would they only arrive in the approximately 6 hours it would take for the sun to set? Then it hit the elf as the human continued to march forward, past the outer city hovels and houses, down the path towards the forest. You can't possibly mean we're going to walk all the way there? That would take the whole day, and we could have completed the job and be back if we took a cart heading that way. Continuing to walk down the paved path, which would take them out of the city's far-reaching fields, Henry turned his head around and looked Althea in the eyes. As an adventurer, you will not always be able to find yourself a cart, and thus you should get used to marching for long periods of time. Now get moving, unless you want to have to set up camp in the dark. Looking between the quickly leaving human and the city, Althea begrudgingly jogged after the man. Despite the quickly descending sun, Althea felt herself succumbing to the heat as she trudged a few paces behind the human, Henry. Looking up at the man in question, he seemed entirely unaffected by the heat, or the fact that both of them had been marching for a little more than 4 hours now. How the hell is that man not tired yet? He's wearing a full suit of half-plate for God's sake. Putting her hands on her knees and taking a moment to catch her breath, Althea was surprised to feel a light tap on their shoulder. Looking up, she saw Henry leaning down, with his hand outstretched, holding a small decanter of some sort. Drink up. It seems like you need it. After a short pause debating whether or not her pride was enough of a reason to deny the human's offering, Althea took the decanter. Unsealing the container and bringing it up to her mouth, Althea felt a wave of relief as the ice-cold water flowed into her mouth. Taking a few more swigs of the life-giving water, Althea lightly swallowed the decanter quizzically, as it felt no lighter than when she first held it. Enchanted, Henry said, as if to answer her unasked question. Investigating the decanter further, the elven mage found that light wisps of mana were being emitted from the decanter, which seemed to have a few minor enchantments, making it have a near-limitless amount of water, and ensuring that said water was cool as ice. Got it a few years back, probably the best investment I've ever made. It certainly makes the long marches easier when you don't have to worry about carrying water. Handing the decanter back with a muttered, "Thank you," which Henry decided not to call attention to, thankfully enough, before both began the walk towards the forest once again. Gratefully, it was seen that the forests were only another hour or so away. The rest of the trip was quiet as the pair continued their march. Occasionally, Henry would stop to look at some animal tracks or something before the two would continue, but aside from that, no other major interruptions occurred. Arriving at the base of the short mountain that the forests seemed to have grown around, Henry quickly found a decent place to set up camp. Clearing away some of the more obstructive pieces of foliage and debris, the human set down his pack and pulled out 2 chunks of prepared firewood, which he had somehow managed to march all the way here with. Building a quick campfire, Henry went back to his travel pack to pull out his trusty flint and steel, when the campfire was suddenly lit ablaze. Turning back towards the fire to see Althea lower her arm, after she had quickly cast a simple firebolt. Nodding his head in thanks, Henry pulled out a few pieces of dried meat and some bread, before handing Althea a few pieces which she accepted. After the pair's quick meal, Henry looked up into the sky and found that the sun was nearly fully down before he walked over to his travel pack. Pulling out a roll of padded leather and a wool blanket and placing it on the ground, Henry looked at Althea and felt a momentary bout of confusion. Wait, do you not have a sleeping roll? The elven mage in question briefly looked down at her enchanted satchel before realizing that she, in fact, did not pack a sleeping roll with them. Sighing under his breath, Henry grabbed his sleeping roll and blanket he was preparing before tossing it over to Althea, who barely caught it. "I'll take the first night shift. Go to sleep. I'll wake you up in a few hours when it's your turn." Deciding not to argue with the man, Althea quickly laid out the leather mat before lying down and placing the wool blanket on top of herself, as she closed her eyes and let her tired legs finally rest. Althea was shaken awake by the armoured form of Henry, lit by the soft glow of the fireplace. Getting up from the bedroll, the elf stretched her back with a pop and rubbed her shoulder in annoyance. It would seem sleeping on the ground would be another thing that she would need to get used to, if she wanted to become an adventurer. Standing up fully, Althea watched for a moment as Henry, relieved of his duty, began stripping out of his half-plate armour. As he pulled off his chainmail, Althea spent a few seconds admiring the rather well-built form of her human partner, before averting her eyes as the man in question turned his head to look at her. Thankfully, that was as far as the awkward situation went, as Henry crawled into the bedroll and closed his eyes. Standing around for a few seconds debating on what she was even supposed to do in this situation, Althea decided that she might as well find something to sit on, and after a few moments she had dragged over a small log. Sitting down on it, the elf occasionally stirred the campfire with a stick, and occasionally tossed a few branches into the fire to keep it going. Every so often she would hear a bit of rustling, or the sound of an animal leaping to catch something or other. Althea was not all too worried about any of these, and a quick cast to create a small ball of light usually revealed the perpetrator to be a small rodent, which would run off upon discovery. That was until the magical sphere of illumination revealed the form of a wolf with one too many eyes, as it pounced out of the darkness and nearly tackled Althea onto the ground. Letting out a panicked scream which seemed to cause Henry to bolt up awake, Althea twisted her hand in a practiced motion before thrusting it forward and spewing out a gout of flames, which forced the not-wolf back a few paces. As Althea did that, Henry rushed to throw on his armour and was about to grab his halberd in order to join the fight, when another not-wolf tackled him down onto his back. The beast attempted to bite down on his neck, but thankfully, Henry managed to block the attack with his left arm, while his right hand fumbled about looking for anything that could give him the advantage. Eventually, his hand found purchase onto something, and without a moment's hesitation, Henry slammed the rock which he had grabbed into the not-wolf's side, causing it to be launched off of him. Getting up off the ground, Henry quickly grabbed his halberd, which was leaning against his travel pack. However, before he could finish off the injured not-wolf, another jumped into the fray, and Henry was narrowly able to block with the shaft of his halberd. Shoving the not-wolf away, and sending out a swift slash in order to keep them at bay, Henry sped a glance at Althea, and found that she too was not doing well. The elven mage had done her best, however the not-wolf that she was facing possessed a speed and ferocity that his body should not have access to. Deciding that fire was not working out for her, Althea began leaning on the crutch of every novice wizard and cast Magic Missile. 3 pinpricks of magical light appeared in the air and sailed out towards the beast and slammed into the animal with a fury. 2 of the bolts only managed to do superficial damage against the not-wolf. However, the last one found his mark, as it sailed straight into one of the eyes of the beast, who let out a shrill shriek. Althea felt a glint of hope that her spell had been enough to take down the not-wolf. However, it was dashed as it began charging at the elf in a blind rage. Realizing that she would not be able to dodge this attack, Althea reacted automatically, and with a flick of her wrist, a magical shield appeared around her, which the not-wolf slammed into. The force of the blow was powerful enough to knock Althea to the ground, and as the magical shield dissipated into dust, she closed her eyes and prepared to be pounced upon. That, however, never came, and before Althea could realize it, a metal form slammed into the injured not-wolf and began stabbing the beast to death with the spearhead of his halberd. Unfortunately, it was seen that Henry's heroic charge had left the last not-wolf uninjured, and said beast took advantage of the human's attack to leap onto his back. As the monster tore at Henry's armoured back, Althea shook off the shock that her near-death experience had left, and gripped her arcane focus before releasing another flurry of magical projectiles. These bolts of light soared forth and pierced the ribs of the beast, causing it to reel back in pain, which gave Henry the opportunity he needed. Twisting around, the armoured human slammed his metal gauntlet into the snout of the not-wolf, with all the force that his adrenaline-fueled body could muster, which seemed to do the beast in, as it dropped to the ground, dead. For a few seconds, the pair waited to see if any more beasts would emerge from the forest, but thankfully no such monsters made themselves known. Simultaneously letting out sighs of relief, Henry practically collapsed to the ground before resting his back against a large rock, which began to be stained with his blood. Rushing over in a panic, Althea watched as blood slowly began pooling on the ground beneath Henry, but was stopped as he brought up a shaky hand and pointed to his travel pack. Running over and rummaging through the bag, Althea quickly found what Henry was looking for, as she pulled out a health potion contained within a small glass bottle. Quickly sprinting back to the injured human, Althea yanked Henry's blood-covered helmet off and began pouring the potion into the man's open mouth, which he greedily drank. Henry visibly relaxed as the last drop of health slipped down his throat, and the human let out a contented sigh before looking up at the worried face of Althea. Henry offered up a smile which seemed to calm the worst of Althea's anxiety, before he pointed over towards his pack and asked the elf if she could fetch it for him. Althea quickly nodded, and before long, Henry was beginning to rummage through the bag before eventually pulling out a small wooden box. Althea's face went from worry to confusion as Henry pulled out a small tube with a string attached to the end. "It's a magical flare," Henry said, as he pulled the string and held the tube towards the sky before a magical projectile shot out the end and created a streak of arcane smoke. "Just called us a pickup cart. Now we just need to wait a couple of hours for one to arrive. Not like I'm in much condition to walk back," Henry stated as he chuckled to himself. It was at this point that the sun began to rise and illuminated the clearing they had set up camp in. Looking down at the human, Althea could now see the full extent of the injuries Henry had sustained, and she realized that if he had not packed a healing potion, the man would have surely died. Blood and viscera more or less completely covered the suit of armor Henry was wearing, and there were long gash marks in the chainmail where the Notwolf had pounced upon him. Sitting down next to Henry against the rock which acted as his support, Althea began watching the forest in case any more of the Notwolves appeared. As the two waited for their pickup, Henry decided to try and fill in the silence as he cleared his throat. "So, Althea, I was wondering, what made you consider becoming an adventurer? I've known many people who had all kinds of reasons, but elves, especially highborns, are not all too common in my line of work." Althea stayed silent for a moment before answering. "I didn't really fit in with the rest of my family. High society was a bit much for me, and the study of magic doesn't really help when navigating politics." Henry, despite the still present pain in his upper back and on his side, let out a hearty chuckle at that. "Guess we were not all too different in that respect. The hustle and bustle of lower nobility markets while I was working as a caravan master for my house just wasn't doing it for me, so I joined the army. Once I was discharged, adventuring was the next most obvious next step, so I signed up pretty much right after. Suppose, now that I think about it, you have to be at least a little eccentric to join up in an adventuring guild." Both let out a few chuckles before settling into a comfortable silence, which was eventually broken by the clacking of hooves and the rumble of wheels as their ride had arrived. Looking up, Althea watched a human man wearing simple clothes and a leather cap, with a smoking pipe sitting in his mouth, as he hopped off the cart. Walking over to Henry, the man let out a surprised whistle as he spotted the amount of blood which marred his armor. "Seems like you've had a rough night, and not a fun one, even with your company." Henry affixed the man with a medium-strength glare, which caused him to immediately raise his hands in a placating manner while maintaining a wide grin. "Just trying to lighten the mood, Henry." Sighing, Henry got up to his feet and nearly stumbled back down if Althea did not catch him. "I know, Copperworth, I know. Could you help grab the corpses? I figure Garen would be happy to get a few new alchemical reagents." Copperworth nodded his head, and quickly enough, the 3 Notwolf corpses were dropped onto the bed of the cart. Climbing aboard, the group swiftly began the trip back to the city. Making good time, the group arrived back before the sun was at its peak, which meant that the majority of the queue waiting to get into the city were not present. After getting waved through by the city guards, Henry and Althea got off the cart, which continued onwards towards the local magical academy to deliver a fresh batch of reagents. Entering the guild hall and walking over to the same elderly clerk, who Althea and Henry talked to the day before, Henry gestured to his companion to hand over the quest paper. Taking the paper from the Earl's hands and quickly stamping it with a guild seal of completion, the halfling clerk looked up at Althea with a smile. "Congratulations on your initiation into the Adventuring Guild. Now that you're a full member, if you would like, I could assign you a full-time party, or you may become a solo adventurer. That is, unless you would prefer to stick with your current partner. What will it be?" Althea looked from the clerk, the new form which had practically materialized in their hand, and Henry, who looked back and shrugged, which managed to convey that it was her choice. The elven mage considered it for a moment. On the one hand, the noble sensibilities in the back of her mind were telling her that continuing to partner with a mere human was an affront to elven pride. However, for whatever reason, a sense of trust towards Henry had fostered, after he had saved her life at the cost of his body. And so, with a smile, Althea turned to the clerk and stated that, "I think I would like to stay with my current partner." The clerk simply nodded before glancing over at Henry with a questioning look, which he returned with a shrug of acceptance. Putting away the form with a smile, the clerk quickly wrote something down onto another piece of paper before stating, "Then it's official. Once again, congratulations on the completion of your initiation. Remember to turn in the quest paper to the quartermaster in order to receive your reward. Have a good day and happy hunting." Practically the second that the clerk put away the piece of paper, the same Dragonborn guard from the gate, although without his armor, laid their arm around Henry's shoulder. "Now, I can't believe it. You, the shut-in, with a partner? Next thing I know, you'll have taken an arrow to the knee. Back!" Before he could react, Henry slammed his elbow into the guard's unarmored stomach, causing the man to drop to the ground in pain. Turning back to his newly inducted companion, Henry spoke with a stained smile. "Let's go turn in that quest, shall we?" Nodding her head in quiet confusion, Althea walked after Henry as he began marching further into the guild, sparing a second to glance back at the Dragonborn sprawled across the ground. "I wonder what he meant by arrow to the knee. I guess I'll ask Henry later." As the two left, Althea could hear the nearly whispered, "Worth it," just as she exited earshot.